Hi, okay, I'm going to dive right into this so that we save on time. So the trunk lid has been scribed out. That came out very, very neatly, but as I did say, you need to take quite a bit of care with that. And I couldn't scribe from the inside in this case. Scribing from the outside was the better option. And the initial removal of the space for those big fat tires. So all I did in this case is I laid the tire against it, did a pencil mark, took my drill and drilled about 20 holes there, and eventually got that out, and then took a round file, not a round, a half round, and I've just done an initial, I don't know if that's going to come out there. It's pretty rough at the moment. Yeah, you can still see. So, and it's not big enough, but it's just to be close to the final product. So anyway, that's coming on. Now, quite a bit of work in fitting the wing and the windscreen and the fuselage, and it's now virtually correct. And when I say virtually, there is still the slightest of gaps underneath there where you can see it's not meeting white to white plastic, but it is extremely close. And I also need to ensure that as I'm doing this, this wing really is 90 degrees to the body. Now, do I have one of those set squares handy with me right now? I probably didn't bring that, but what I need to do is hold this in the position that it seems like it would be gluing at, put the set square against that, you've got that center line there, and this wing, in fact, how can I do this so that you can see? If I check if this wing has any dihedral, it barely has any, which means that I can put this over here on the one side with a set square, not with a ruler, and judge it on both sides. And at the moment it's looking like this wing's a little bit high, even with this very rough, crude, quick measure. No, maybe not. Okay, so anyway, that's what I need to do. But what I wanted to say is, while I was busy scraping and test fitting before the canopy was glued on, I was realizing that it was allowing the wing to position the canopy too much. So when it was close, I decided no, time to just glue that on. So that is now glued on very well with actual glue, and you can get away with that quite often when you have ventilation, so that you don't get the glue vapors building up and crazing your clear part. And in this case I'm using a bit thicker Tamiya liquid, simply because it's older, and I'm putting some onto the plastic, letting it settle, let the vapors get off a little bit, but there's still enough glue. I mean, it's at that point it's fairly close to tube glue, to be honest, and then seating it on there. And then when I put this on, and I realized that before I even did, it was not fitting on at all well. Not like when I had the canopy loose, because the wing was adjusting the canopy off to one side a bit. But then with a little bit of adjustment on the wing, especially on these pins, ever so slightly, because you don't want to actually shift the wing, we are back to as close as I was. So there's, it's not perfect. This is a little bit of a tricky one. It'll be good enough. It's not perfect, but I'd like to just get that joint equally good on both sides. The wing is positioned a little bit high, but we're very close. And then, as I say, I've now, once I'm sort of happy with that position, I've just got a lot of that window masking to do. For the side window masking, I'm just going to put a piece of tape right over the across all of it, which means that those side bars will get covered and won't get painted in the initial painting. I can also put a square over each window, but because the windows are very recessed, there's quite a possibility that the square of tape gets pushed in a little bit too far. I'll see what I do. I do have that joint on the middle of the wing, which is not perfect, and that now would come down to how good is the rest of my build. Now I have done that pretty well, so there's actually very little wrong with anything else on this aeroplane, so it probably is worth trying to let that not be a blemish on the final product. Okay, on the B1. Now, I did mention to you that because I have pilfered the decals from the AMT Ertl, and I've got that to add to the decals for this one, I've got a choice of a fair bit of stuff. I haven't browsed or researched or looked at any which one I would choose. I mean, briefly looking here, not that keen on that one. That one is not a bad choice. That one's not a bad choice. If Lucky Lady was a slightly better decal, I would option for that. These are sort of very basic decals, so we'll see. I'll see what's, if one could mix and match a little bit but still stick within a realistic scheme. But what I do want to speak about, where's that barrel? Did I leave that barrel in here? The barrel for the horizontal stabilizers. I can't remember where that's got to. What I wanted to speak about right now was the finish. So this is not going to be the grey one, this will be the camouflaged one. And what I wanted to consider was, do I use that process of sanding raised panel lines down to add to that little bit of detail on the final product? Now, I've done it on a number of aircraft. On the Vulcan it works very, very well because you've got the white color scheme and then you had a slightly darker plastic than this underneath, which when you sand it shines through as a dark gray. Very visible, sort of a perfect little line. This is a light plastic and it'll be painted in a camo scheme, which means you don't have a dark color coming through as panel lines. You'd have a light gray, but in shadow effect, so it will be more like a medium gray, but it should still shine up very well against green and brown. So the question is the sort of height and thickness of these lines. They are not bad at all. They are not heavy thick like some early Airfix. So this will be a very fine sanding effect to bring them out. Is it worth it? Probably yes. There's not a ton of lines on this thing. Very easy to sand top surface to just bring out that line detail. There's not a whole lot on this bottom surface. There's a little bit more over here. There's very few lines on there. One over there, one at the front. There is a little bit on the fin, and lower surface has got quite a lot, which is good. So that's very worthwhile, getting all of that detail out. And upper surface, same thing. So starting with the approach that all of my detail can be brought out with a light sanding of the paintwork. Sometimes when you do that, you go through your paintwork. So one, paint a bit thicker, but you can also do a pre-coat. And in fact, you can even do a further pre-coat in a dark color so that when you sand the panel lines, they don't come out in the plastic color. You actually reach that darker color. So for instance, if you wanted darker panel lines to come out, I could paint the whole aeroplane black, so that on the lightest of sanding, you go through to the black base coat. And if you go a little bit too hard, you get through to the black plastic. That's one option. And then even if you do the black, you can do a pre-coat of a slightly different brown and green from what your final effect is. A lighter brown, a lighter green, so that as you're sanding and you might go through your top surface, you can start getting tonal differences just from your sanding. That's an option. So first thing is, yes, I will be doing the sanding technique. Will I be using matte as the coloration? Probably not. I'd actually like to go for a good finish. So it will be at the least a satin base coat, and I could go for that dark one, depending on what I think these very fine lines will look like coming through a brown and green camo. Black is, one approach. Some modelers think that black is a bit too much, but that's, this is a very fine line. That's different from running black wash into a recessed panel line, which looks a lot thicker than just this very, very thin line. Or you just leave out the black and you just go with a plastic color, so it'll still be visible. It won't be in your face. It'll be quite subtle, which does mean that it'll really only be appreciable when you look at the aircraft closely. The engines do have a few lines, and it's not that vital, but yes, a light sanding on there. So all of the sanding is not the most difficult. I mean, it still takes a while. You've got to be gentle and you've got to not put too much pressure, but especially on edges, one always goes through the paint, and that's okay, because the weathering on an aircraft doesn't occur evenly, and you can touch up areas where you might have gone through all the paint with another little bit of final touch up and separate weathering. And then, of course, added to that, you can do specific separate painting to see all of those panels, actual different color rather than just the sanding aspect. So that's probably worth it as well. The wings and upper surface is where all of your initial view, that's what you're going to be appreciating on the aircraft. Underside by far less. Tailplane sort of less. The tailplane is quite minimal in the whole aircraft build. And as I say, this one undercarriage up, so we've got nothing out there. So I will have to go and do a little bit of research and decide on which of these color schemes I'm doing. We do have these very long grey decals, which I may or may not put on. One could achieve a very nice result without actually using them. They've got quite a bit of carrier film next to the grey because there's no steps. There's a no. I think it's a no step. Oh, it just says walkway. Sorry, it says walkway, not no steps. So it is actually walkway. But because of that little extra bit, there's more carrier film there. So likelihood of that being visible is quite great. So that's a decal which we could leave out. Okay, that is just a quick analysis of what I'm doing in the initial approach to this thing. Choosing the colors for the initial spraying. Oh, and being careful when I glue the halves. When I glue those halves, don't sand and fill in such a way that you lose these raised panel lines. I need them to stay for the final painting effect. So for instance, around here, when I'm filling that, don't go and sand around and lose those lines there. Okay, happy modeling.